Order. Welcome to today's session of the Business and Trade Select Committee as we continue our inquiry into small business strategy. Thank you to all of our witnesses for joining us here this afternoon. Tim Balcon, I wonder if I could start with you. The government has set out some very ambitious targets to build 1.5 million homes, retrofit an awful lot more homes, upgrade 5 million homes, and embark on a number of big infrastructure projects. Does the country have the workforce to complete that work?
As it stands now, probably not. But of course, all of the activity that you just described there will happen over time. It'll build. And the Construction Skills Mission Board is a mechanism where industry and government have come together to address that very issue. So can we get the capability and skills we need? The answer is yes. But it will mean that the skills system and the employers have to work hand in hand, work in partnership to develop processes and collaboratively agree action plans to be able to do that.
I mean, I think you've set out that we need almost 250,000 people over the next 4 or 5 years in order to get this task done. I mean, where are those people going to come from?
So the colleges, at the minute, if you look at colleges, there's around about 110,000 people in a construction-related course as we speak now, every year.
How many?
110,000.
110,000, okay.
About 60,000 of those, a little bit less than that, 57,000 of those won't achieve or they won't go into a job. So nearly 2/3 of those that start a construction-related qualification won't end up either completing that course or going into a job. So if we make the skills system, if you like, the process by which we train people more efficient, the people are there. Colleges will say that the construction courses are generally oversubscribed. They're generally very popular for lots of reasons. So the numbers are there. What we need to do is to convert the numbers going into training or considering construction into employment.
That's a heck of a dropout rate. Is that ultimately what we're talking about? 2/3 don't complete the course.
Yeah.
Have you got a sense of why that is?
Often when I talk about this, it comes across as being quite critical of colleges, and that's absolutely not what I'm trying to say here. The colleges would love employers to be at the end of their training to put them into work. So in a sense, the college are training people, but there's an absence of jobs where the jobs are, which is a real key issue. So linking those job vacancies into training would be a game changer. Would be a massive step forward. Now, one of the reasons why that's difficult is that the industry is made up by 98% of SMEs or micro businesses, so companies under 9 people. Their ability to engage in a formal skills infrastructure is clearly very limited. And the way that the construction recruits is generally word of mouth. So they don't advertise vacancies. Only companies of a certain size would use organisations like Indeed.com and those kind of general recruitment companies. They tend to recruit by word of mouth, a friend of a friend, friend of a family, some of them met in the pub, just to get people through the door. So there's an informal recruitment system into construction, which is not allied to the 110,000 people that we've got.
Are you saying that the 2/3 of people are dropping out because they're going into work early, or they're changing their mind about their forward path in life?
Some will get a job, and it's hard to say what numbers will get a job, because one of the things I really would like is to have some destination data from colleges.
Yes.
We haven't got. Some will get a job. Some of those that are in training will see a job working at, let's say, as a delivery driver, where they can instantly get, and they will leave their course and go and join a job such as that.
Yeah. And are there particular skills shortages that you can already see are going to hamper us in achieving these extremely ambitious build targets?
It's generally across the board, but you would take the major trades, the bricklaying, the carpentry, the groundworks. Those trades are it's across the board there, but also, joined here today by Josh, you've got the more specialisms. I don't think roofing is a specialism, by the way, but you've got those roofing, flooring kind of activities where training is harder because the numbers don't really give a college a classroom full. Full classroom. So it's hard to put that training provision in place.
Okay. And when we're thinking about filling this 250,000 target, does the industry have a view about how many workers will be needed from abroad and how many workers actually will come from the UK?
We haven't done that. What we've said is that if we create a skills system for our Indigenous workforce, then that will relieve the pressure from getting workers coming from abroad. And by the way, the 250,000 that you mentioned was a number that we published before the housing targets, the infrastructure targets and the retrofit targets. So you can add another...
Actually, the number should be bigger.
It's another 110,000 on top of that over 5 years.
Okay. That's a huge number.
It is.
So, Josh Clarke, what's your perspective on the front line? What kind of skill shortages get in your way?
So we are a medium-sized business based on the south coast in Eastbourne, third-generation company. We really struggle with getting young blood into the industry. I've spoken to various other contractors in the southeast, and it's across the board, nationally as well. No one is coming through for whatever reason. The average age of a roofer, specifically is 50, which does not work for the game that we're in, essentially. But the issue that we're having is, from our side, where we are based down in Eastbourne, the provision of training and the locations is not great enough. So for our guys to go for training, they go to Leytonstone in East London. Wow. So for a 16-year-old lad to go from from Eastbourne to Leytonstone for a week is quite daunting. It's changed a lot in the last few years. When I was 16, you probably wouldn't bat an eyelid, but now people are a bit more cautious. Yeah. There was another training centre down in Littlehampton, which is along the coast, which is closer, but they have closed because they can't get the numbers. So they're not
when you think about your firm and the contracts that you want to get stuck into over the next year or two, give us a sense of how serious the skills gap is for your firm.
So it's very hard to keep guys with the issues going on with the insurance hikes and everything anyway, and keeping them trained. We have got ambitions to grow, but that ambition is being hampered by the prospect of not having enough guys to do the work, essentially.
So if you think about this year and you think about the headcount you've got at the moment, in an ideal world, how many extra people would you need?
We could probably take another 15 on, another 15 operatives. The problem is, for the work we do, which is sort of specialist in heritage and that sort of thing, so it's not new build work, a lot of our best guys have been trained from the generations above and passed down, stuff that you can't learn at college, and it's got to be out on site. So it's fine having apprentices coming through, but 10 apprentices to us is no use whatsoever.
Your total headcount at the moment is what?
55.
55.
So employed, actually,
so 15 is a pretty significant gap.
But then we've got another 65 subcontractors as well. Yeah. So they are pretty much constantly.
And when you hear the kind of targets the government has set out, so commitment to build 1.5 million homes, retrofitting to meet the 2050 target, upgrading 5 million homes over 5 years, major infrastructure projects. I mean, do you think there's a hope in hell that we can achieve all of that with the workforce we've got today?
Honestly, no.
Right.
It's not going to happen.
Okay. Matt Weston.
Thank you, Chair. Question for you, Tim Malcolm. Just interested to know, within the construction industry, where you see the really significant gaps in terms of roles or subsectors in terms of trying to get people in and trained.
I think it's pretty evenly spread, in fairness, but we've just, part of the work we're doing with the Mission Board is we've taken the house building objectives, the infrastructure objectives, and we've mapped that workload across the country. And what that tells us where the workload is. So, for example, what we tried to do there is to understand where the hotspots are of work activity. Now, actually, it's fairly evenly spread, but there's different work in different parts of the country. So, for example, in Liverpool, you'll find a lot of work in terms of retrofit and domestic maintenance. In the Suffolk, you'll find with building a nuclear plant, plus the reservoir, plus the hospitals programme, you've got more of an engineering bias. But either one of those examples need all of the skills that we're talking about here. It's just the numbers. So going back to the point I was making, we are mapping across Great Britain where the hotspots of work activity. And because we've done that, we can then identify the roles that's needed to do those jobs. So we know there's about £3 trillion worth of construction project activity that's taking place in the next 3 years across Great Britain.
£3 trillion worth of
£3
construction activity in the next 3 years.
Yes.
And how do you assemble that data?
So it's a tried and tested methodology that we use, which a lot of the projects we're talking about are £250 million and above, so there's a database of those projects. We can take that. We can then speak to local regions to understand their, if you like, business as usual workload. So there's a number of assumptions plus hard data in terms of work activity. Now, if you take the projects I'm talking about there, some of those are still waiting to happen. So, for example, if you take Thames Gateway, everybody wants the Thames Gateway to happen. There's been a go-ahead, but it's not going to go ahead at this as we speak now because it requires funding. Mm-hmm. So it's project activity that's there, if you like, but we just need to understand precisely when that's going to happen. So the mapping that we've done, we've probably got as the best data that we've ever had, and that's because we've been working with colleagues of Skills England and DFE. The other thing that we've done is we've mapped the training provision on top of that. So we understand what training provision is available, and we can drill right down to things like roofers. So we can say how many roofers in that area, what is the provision like, and then we can make some solutions or interventions as we see necessary.
Speaking to my local college, Warwick Street College, 6th largest in the country, they have loads of young people who want to get into be plumbers or electricians or whatever. They just can't provide the training because there aren't enough tutors. Is that what you see across the country?
Yeah,
and in all sectors?
I think that's right. Generally speaking, I think plumbing, bricklaying, carpentry, those are the main, if you like, the core construction products that colleges generally train on because they can get volume of numbers through that. As we just heard, roofing is a separate one. An example on roofing, we've just set up a roofing qualification at our own college, and it took us 18 months to find a trainer. Wow. So it is an issue.
Sarah, David, we'll come to you both now. In terms of how we can address that, what work is being done, recognising the gaps and the £3 trillion worth of construction that could be happening, but we might be letting young people down or adult learners who want to get back into construction, letting them down as well, just because we haven't got the training in place?
Yeah, it's a really important question, thank you. And thanks for inviting me to be part of the panel this afternoon. So Skills England has a really important role to play in this. We were established formally in June, so we've been going for 4 months or so. And in that time, I think, have done some useful things, as Tim mentioned, pulling together data, publishing reports that show where skills gaps are and where they're likely to be in future, so that we're all working from the same data, if you like. I think in the past some of the problems have been around people talking at cross purposes, but now we have a sort of single authoritative voice in the form of Skills England's reports that are out. And if you haven't had a chance to see them, they are, and you like lots of data, please do have a look. If not, they have excellent executive summaries if you prefer a short version. But we're very live to the fact that there are difficulties in finding trainers, tutors for some of these courses. It's a competitive market, and when there are big construction projects on the go, it's, there's a sort of economic drive towards people working in those projects rather than coming back into colleges and teaching where you earn less as a trainer. So matching and understanding where those gaps are with colleges, working with the Association of Colleges, David and his colleagues, to see how we can think in new ways around solving some of those problems, whether it's through more innovative ways of teaching, so some blended learning, some on-site, some distance learning, some online or AI. Those are the sorts of things that Skills England is trying to help promote so that we can solve some of those tricky problems like lack of...
And David, what are your members doing?
Lots of things. I mean, you've got to remember that what we know is there's an enormous need, isn't there, for more skilled people in the workforce, but the demand from learners needs a bit of attention as well. So what we know is there's massive stereotyping, so schools will push people into construction training, not knowing why, other than they just think that's probably a good place for them. They're not doing very well with their GCSEs, and that's why you get quite a lot of dropout. They go into whether it's bricklaying or even roofing, and then they find out it's not for them. Josh was saying earlier, you know, a day on a roof and you know whether you want to work on a roof or not.
Yeah, by 10 o'clock, you know.
Yeah. So there's a really, really important job, I think, about getting the right demand from the right learners and the right young people and adults as well. We're not solving this with young people, we're solving it with adults who are already in the workforce, and we need them to be persuaded that they have a future in construction. And then we need to find the training that they can do. So there's a demand issue from learners themselves, I think there is still a perception issue about the sector. People just don't understand how many jobs there are, what jobs are available, what progression possibilities there are. I think there is a reality about some building sites still, which is probably not particularly attractive to people who aren't white men, you know, straight men, and we've got to recognise that. So there's some change in the industry. You know, we've got to work harder at getting people to think, if I go and work for that company, it'll be a great company to work for. And I think across the industry, there's some attention to be paid. What colleges are doing is paying as much as they possibly can to attract the lecturers. So, you know, college just down the road are paying 55,000 for a construction lecturer, when many of their other lecturers are on 35 to 40,000. And they're doing that, you know, just to make sure they've got people. But there are, across the country, more people wanting to be trained who cannot get the lecturer to be able to train them. I mean, it's a massive problem. The government, to be fair, is trying and is starting to put a bit more money into it, but it's not enough.
So as things stand today, David, we've already heard some scepticism about whether we are going to be able to put in place the workforce to build all of these things. What's your view?
Well, the capacity is not there at the moment. And as Tim said, the partnership that's being sort of installing now, you know, the Construction Skills Mission Board, I think it's a fantastic vehicle. I've got quite a lot of hope that will start to make a change. The government's put some money in. I think it needs to think about more. You know, it put 600 million in. It sounds like a lot, but the scale of the challenge is just enormous. And there is massive competition. You know, the Department for Energy Security is saying we need people. Nuclear industry needs people. Reservoirs, roads.
You've seen skills policy through many iterations over the years. What's your confidence level now that there's a plan in place to...
I'm much more confident now, Liam, because we've got a partnership between the employers and the colleges, and that's the first time I've seen that properly. Too much in the past, it's been pointing fingers. It's them over there that are falling short. Colleges haven't got the quality, employers aren't offering the work experience. Well, there's probably some truth in both of those, but actually together we need to solve it.
We'll take that as qualified confidence in that case. Okay, thank you. Sarah Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. And I think just picking up on some of what we've been talking about, and maybe if I start, Josh, with your view, because I think you sort of indicated earlier, but sort of what are the main problems for you as an SME trying to access the skills that you need, whether that's across the system or actually just the workforce? Can you sort of give us some colour?
Yeah, so the training process is quite hard to navigate, and that's a common thing that we hear from various people, and I know that's changing slightly, isn't it?
I entirely agree with it.
Yeah, but the actual process of the application, the funding and that sort of thing makes it very, very tricky to understand. We're fortunate enough we've got a lady that is brilliant at it and she gets it, but it's not the same for everyone, and if you understand it, you almost give up. And
can you just talk us through, like, literally, if you've got 15 people that you'd love to go and hire, I mean, what would you do beginning next week to try and get those people?
Initially, probably ask our operatives if they know of anyone. Then we would look at other companies and see if there's anyone that is skilled that we could take. Unfortunately, which doesn't help the situation, I know that. Or, you know, you can go out for apprentices, but it's not a quick fix. So essentially it's going out and trying to find, you know, trained operatives already from people that we know to bring them into the company. A lot of our guys have been with us for 20 years plus, so they are family, they're friends, you know, they know of other people. And sometimes you find an absolute gem and they love the industry and they get on with it. Separate to all that, you know, going back to the very start, just on trying to get more people in the industry, we need to change the perception within schools that the industry is, you know, down low in hierarchy of needs. We recently done some mentoring with a local school, and we had 15 kids, and sort of half of us said, why have we got these children? And they're like, oh, because they're not great academically, so we thought they'd excel here. Well, that's your perception of. So the schools have got it wrong as well. Why can if someone's really good at English and maths, why can they not be a roofer? Why can they not be a painter, decorator, electrician? They're almost just palming them off to try and get them a career or some knowledge in something. But yeah, ultimately, we would go out and try and find, other local operatives and try and take them for ourselves. But yeah, or train, other or new members of staff. So.
Thank you, Chair. And so sort of moving on a little bit from that, so I chair the SME House Builder at APPG, and I did a visit a couple of months ago to the National House Building Council in Lichfield. They've got a new training site there, and effectively what they're doing there is sort of shortening the process, removing some of the stuff that actually nice to know but not need to know, and actually saying, if we need to build a house, what are the skills that they need to build this house, and speed that through. And that's happening in some places, not everywhere. Is that a model that we need to be ramping up, because we get the interest, we get people through the system, and then they start to say, I do like this and I stay, or I quite like the idea of changing from being a roofer to a bricklayer, or vice versa.
So in the new build industry, a house is very standard, give or take.
Exactly.
It's not it's not a listed building, but if there could be a college course like there is for bricklaying, plumbing, electricians, then with the basics, then that was going to help solve some issues, because within a year they would be able to potentially tile a house on a new build site.
And this and because what they're doing is they're linking with a site that's already up and running, so they're on site, they're shortening that period of being in the classroom, which for many may not suit them. Then they drop out because they don't like it.
And also every time they're going off to college, they're losing productivity on site anyway, so that's slowing down the process as well. So if there's more on site training, that's going to speed up everything.
Brilliant. I was going to come to you, Tim. What do you think? Because you've got a knowledge of these, and obviously quite a number have been sort of going up around the country.
Yeah, so we work very close with NHBC, so that model that they have developed is exactly the right model. So without being overly critical here, I'm trying not to do, because I think there are more opportunities than
amongst friends, you can be as critical as you like.
Yes, okay, thank you. The current qualification system is too inflexible to deal with the construction, inflexible to deal with the needs of construction industry. What NHBC have done is taken the bones of what's in an apprenticeship, and we're now doing an access course, and said if we had to streamline that, make that more efficient to give employers what they want, what would that look like? And NHBC have come out with part of that answer. So what we're now developing with them is a more shorter course that gives people that kind of, let's get them on site very quickly to see whether they're going to stay the test of time, and whether it's worth investing in it a little bit longer. So ultimately what we can build up is a progression route for individuals that says, actually, rather than spend 2 years on a course, I can spend 8 weeks, 9 weeks, develop some skills, and if I really like it, I can then develop some more skills. The other thing about the skills system, which is probably what turns some employers off, is it's qualification based as an outcome, and what employers are looking for is productivity and competence based as an outcome. So it's just nuancing what we have, and it's not about radical reform. The bones of what's in the qualification is not far off. It just needs aligning better to how employers use it in the way that Josh has described.
That's really positive to hear. And I guess the next question would be, if we can shorten and curtail and get that right to get some of the churn going, which is what needs to happen, we also then need to retain people and then train them to a next skill level, because as you say, there'll be heritage buildings, there'll be complex, different methods of construction, and you want to get the people who are really keen. So is there some thought also about, if we can get this foundational principle right, how we then take it to the next stage and what that looks like?
So we had a construction skills mission board yesterday, and this topic was brought up. So it's in effect it's a career pathway. So we're developing, regardless of which qualification or route you take, it's founded on a determination of competence to some degree. But you can build on that competence as you build your learning and your training. What's missing at the minute, to many employers, they can't make head and tail whether an apprenticeship, whether it's a boot camp, whether it's a foundation. All of this is just different language. What we need is clarity that says, if I take an individual on, I can train him on this thing, And if they're good at that, then we can go to the next thing and the next thing. And regardless of what qualification route or pathway that they learn, the employee knows what skill level that individual will achieve by doing that. That's
you were nodding at that point.
Yeah, so there's, in our industry, in roofing, there's a clear pathway from start to finish, from labouring to learning, to batting a roof out. But to get the basics at college for the HPC for new, it won't take long, and then you can go year on year, look at the training, where do you want to go next, what are you good at, what you're not so good at, what do you need to do. My issue at the moment is the funding to do the training has been cut, I believe. So we are now worse off, so we're going to be putting our hand in our pocket more to pay for the training for the guys.
Right.
So we're going train, well, you've just cut our funding.
That sounds like a problem.
Yeah, it just doesn't make sense at all.
Sonia Kumar?
Thank you, Chair. This is for David. Do you feel like the local skills improvement plans are working with businesses?
Some of them worked quite well. Most of them didn't in their first iteration. I think they didn't get into the detail enough. I think we've got to see much more engagement in and much more targeting in sectors. The numbers Tim's talking about are all over the country, and then in some places incredibly localised. The nuclear industry. Go to Bridgewater, is a massive need there. And those needs weren't reflected in the local skills improvement plans enough. So we've got to get deeper into them, and we've got to engage businesses in them more, because the answer is always about trying to influence demand for those jobs and then create the pathways, as Tim was saying, to help people get into those industries. And so lots to do on the local skills improvement plans. I think first year was a good start. You wouldn't expect everyone to be great. We've got to learn from the weak ones. We've got to get them much more tied into the local economic growth strategies, and we've got to get them absolutely engaging the right employers, because some of them just simply didn't do that.
I was trying to avoid getting into the vexed issue of careers education, but you've left me no option at this stage. So, given that we do now have pretty good spatial understanding of where the skill shortages are, what on earth are we going to do to try and bring an incredibly fragmented academy-based school system to the table?
Well, I think it's really tough, isn't it? Josh was explaining the work they do with schools, but the culture in schools has got to change, hasn't it? We've got to, and this is what I'm saying about the perceptions of the industry. We've got to get not just the careers specialists to understand the sector, but the teachers. We need teachers not to think, little Johnny or little Jenny's not particularly bright, I'll put them into construction, because that is what happened. And it's not malevolent, it's not necessarily a bad thing that they're trying to do. They think it's the right thing for them. But if we do that, what we'll do is we'll end up putting them into jobs that they will really struggle in, and they won't progress. They won't be able to get the skills to stay on site and to stay relevant.
These LSIPs currently incorporate any kind of plan to weave schools into the delivery?
No, because
system?
they're not. It's not part of the system, So
but is that not an error?
Yeah, it is a massive error. So the government said we need local economic growth strategies. You then presumably want the skills improvement plan to speak to that, don't you?
And anyone who works with schools knows you've actually got to start with junior schools.
No, absolutely, yeah. And you've got to start really young. You've got to start with 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds.
Yeah.
That's absolutely for certain. And employers need to help us with that, because schools and colleges can't do that on their own. It has to be with...
Yeah, so we, for the last 6 months, have been going into local schools off our own back and just advocating the industry, basically. So we've got a little training we take in. They actually have a little go, lay some tiles. We talk them through what we do. And the uptake has been unbelievable. It's been really, really positive. We can't change anything by ourselves, but we're still trying to do our bit.
That might be a recommendation that we come to, that actually weaving schools, including junior and infant schools, into LSIPs is a common sense thing to do. Sonia Kumar.
Just going back, so there's places like in Dudley, there's low employment, high levels of people in work poverty. How do you think you can get residents or learners without any qualifications that are in SMEs to access education for their employees?
So look, and it's a really important issue, this, that we could get every single young person into the construction industry possible, and we still wouldn't solve the problem. So we need people who are working in other sectors to come into the industry over the next 5 to 10 years. And that's a bigger challenge, I think, than getting young people. So you'll know Dudley, they reach out to the SMEs, don't they? They work.
They do indeed. They're actually an excellent college. They've got 11,000 students, and we're now becoming a construction college. So it's a good format, and I thought I'll ask the question anyway.
Yeah, and the reason they get that connection is because they're offering SMEs more than just skilled people. The skilled people bit is important, but they're offering them an understanding of the technology, an understanding of what technology is coming, how business techniques are changing. It could be digital skills as well to help change the business and do the innovation that the business needs to grow and to be successful. And then you provide the skills that are coming behind that. So that innovation role of colleges needs to be much, much stronger. There's a brilliant pilot going on, supported by UKRI. We need that to be mainstream, so every college is getting innovation money to work with SMEs on how to improve their businesses and then providing the skills that. And then, I hate to say it, but in the end we need more money going into training adults who are already in the workforce. The adult budget is less than half of what it was when I used to manage it 20 years ago, less than half in cash terms. Right? So that the opportunities for adults to retrain have absolutely plummeted in the last 20 years. That needs to change, and it needs to change really, really quickly.
How do you think we can be, so colleges and places that are doing some excellent work, how are we modelling that to put like a benchmark for other areas that maybe are struggling or have some challenges, for that to be then replicated across the country? And I'll get to Sarah.
Yeah, I think Skills England's got a key role to play here. So one of the lenses with which we examine issues like this is through place. Because we can have a national policy, but it doesn't always make sense in individual areas, obviously, as you know. So the models of the technical excellence colleges is a great model, starting with the construction ones, seeing how that works and how we can replicate that in other sectors, but also really understanding the role of place, the role of mayors, working really closely with MSAs, the strategic authorities, to understand and share data, insight, which kind of interactions are working well, where is it the support from people who are leaving college and going into their first jobs is working well, and how we can help to replicate that across the country or share that good practice, I think is really important. And we're seeing some really good things coming through. It's just there's a lot of complexity in the skills system, as we've been hearing. And I think one of the roles for Skills England is to help to hide the wiring and make it easier for people to understand the system as a whole. So whether you're a learner, a college, another provider, an employer, making it easier to understand how the system works and how the system works in your area. So that's very high up on our list of things to do quickly, and we're working on.
So just help us to decode what you've said. I mean, how would that work for Josh, for example, who's currently got to send roofers to Leytonstone from Eastbourne to get trained?
Yeah. So local skills dashboards, conversations with mayors, where there are mayors or strategic authorities, local authorities, partners, ERBs, the conversations that happen around the LSIPs. It's about local
so literally,
knowledge.
if Josh has got to find 15 roofers,
yeah.
Are you saying that he's got to turn to a local skills dashboard?
Not necessarily, and we've heard a number of ways in which he is doing that now. But it's another tool in the toolbox to be able to look and see.
But literally, if Eastbourne College doesn't have roofing training and the nearest provision is in Leytonstone, I mean, we're going to have a problem.
So,
can I say,
please?
Separately, we for the last 4 months have been working with East Sussex College, and we have had meetings to try and make this happen down in Eastbourne or somewhere local. To put a roofing college in. It's very early days, and they're running the numbers to see if they can make it feasible. If it can, and if it can work, it'd be fantastic for the whole of the South East. But our biggest problem, when you're talking to someone at an apprenticeship roadshow or a workshop, and you say, "Oh yeah, your daughter's going to go off to Leytonstone," straight away there's a barrier, and you go, it's not that bad, and but we don't want to go there. So,
and actually building a construction centre at a college with the confidence that it's going to be running apprentices through it, I mean, that's a 3-year process. minimum?
Oh, so in 4 months we've
we
found a tutor that's willing to do that sort of thing. So essentially everything's there. It's just finding the funds and running the numbers to make sure we get the people through the door to make it work.
Okay. Sonia Cooper, anything further on that? No, John Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. One for you, Sarah, in Skills England, obviously fairly new. I think you've only been established since June, you said, fully. And I think the big sea change, obviously, with the arrival of the Growth and Skills Levy as opposed to the old apprenticeship levy, I think that's broadly been welcomed. Would you agree with that? But possibly a little warning sign ahead. The National Federation of Roofing Contractors told us that there's no SME representation on your board and limited engagement with the organisation. Is that a straw in the wind? Is there a difficulty there with the SMEs and your engagement with them? And what might you be doing about that?
Thank you. Really important question. So yes, we are still fairly new. However, we have an active and enthusiastic board and chair in Phil Smith, who is very interested in what we can do to support SMEs with their training needs and filling those skills gaps. Before we were officially launched, we conducted a lot of engagement with employers, including small and medium-sized employers and representative bodies for SMEs. And you're right, a lot of the feedback that we had. So we had a series of engagement activity resulting in a report we published, which showed the sorts of things that we're talking about today that SMEs find difficult with the skills system, that it is complex, that some of the courses feel long, difficult to complete, lots of clear feedback about the opportunities within the new Growth and Skills Levy, seeking more flexibility, shorter courses, modular approaches, those sorts of things. And I think, so Skills England is a delivery executive agency. Policy is made by government departments, but the sorts of feedback and insight that we can give to our policy and making colleagues and ministers is around the importance of listening to what will work for SMEs.
You said that you spoke to SMEs
and
you're ramping up. Is that an ongoing process?
Absolutely
Are you going to make
ongoing.
that part of your ongoing process?
So we have an SME engagement plan which is quite extensive and will include a series of regional roundtables. So I think regional, as I was mentioning before, is really important. But direct engagement through some of the umbrella organisations and individuals representing small firms.
You spoke about how vigorous your board is. Is there room on that board for someone from the SME sector? We have the board is appointed, but we would love to invite people to come and talk to us about specific things, such as the experience of SMEs. We have a number of board members who would like to take this forward and give it some attention in a smaller forum and talk to people directly. So I think that would be helpful if we're able to do that quickly. The other thing that I think we heard loud and clear from SMEs is pace has been an issue, agility in the system, ability to amend and update things, training programs, apprenticeships has in the past taken quite a long time, and so that's another bit of delivery that I think Skills England can really help with in terms of speeding up that process, listening quickly and making those changes to apprenticeships, including the work that we're currently doing on short courses.
Richard, can I just check? I mean, you and I have probably discussed these issues for about 15 years now. And so it's great that Skills England has embarked on a listening exercise in its first year. It doesn't sound like any of this feedback is novel or surprising. Can I just get your check on what actually does need to happen next?
Look, we've got a massively national system that doesn't work everywhere, and it particularly doesn't work for SMEs, and we know that. We've known that for the last 15, 20 years, and part of the solution is, and this is to DFE really, that the policy can't be made in Whitehall and be applicable in Dudley and in Sandwell and in every part of the country. What we need is more trust in the providers. So colleges know what their employers want. The average college works with about 1,000 employers. It's loads more than you can ever hope to engage with. It's just impossible. So we need them to have that flexibility, but they haven't got any. And we've been saying that for a long.
Got any flexibility over what?
over the qualifications, over being able to deliver the type of thing the NHBC are delivering. They just can't do that. They're not allowed to do that.
So we're locked into a kind of Stalinist, top-down.
Your words, Liam, Stalinist. I obviously wouldn't use those words in this building. But yeah, I mean, it's a very national system, and the colleges are sort of vassals in it. And what we want is them to have the power to meet local employer need. Ofsted has been looking at colleges to say, are they meeting local employer need? And across the country, they've said they're brilliant at it. The employers they work with, they know exactly what they need, but they just need some help to have the powers to be able to do this.
So Sarah, just so we understand the full circle of life here, so you've got this fantastic feedback which confirms everything that everyone's been saying for the last 15 years, which is great. What are you going to do with this feedback now? Are you literally now having to wait for ministers to amend a qualifications framework?
No, so it's an evolution, but the things that have happened already as a result of that...
Slow evolution, I think we'd agree.
Well, shorter apprenticeships already introduced, new foundation apprenticeships available from August this year, short courses that we're working on the development for to be available from April next year. That feels quite...
I just want to check this specific point. So do you now require ministers to amend a qualifications framework to introduce the kind of flexibility that David Hughes has asked for?
Not for the things that I've listed, for other things that might come forward.
But Sarah, I mean, with all respect, that what you're talking about is another national set of qualifications being designed. I'm saying trust some of the colleges to get on and do it. We've invested in 10 technical excellence colleges in construction. Let's trust them to be able to meet the employer's needs and see what happens. You know, what will happen will be fantastic. And people like Josh will go, bloody hell, we're getting what we need finally. You know? If we try and design it in Whitehall all the time, we'll get it wrong again and again and again and again. It'll be too rigid, it'll be too slow, and it won't be meeting employers' needs.
Okay, the clock is slightly against us, but let me just bring in Matt Weston very briefly, and then I'm going to come to Charlie Maynard.
Briefly, to the two of you, well, I think to the two of you, but maybe very brief comments from others. Which other country is doing this better?
Apart from Switzerland.
I mean, look, there's places like Holland that they allow a sort of an 80% of a qualification to be set nationally and 20% to be set locally between the college and the employers. Really fantastic way of doing it. We're not asking for a complete, chaos. What we're saying is just have that edge of agility in the system, and we've been pushing that for ages.
Okay, thank you very much, Charlie Maynard.
Well, I think I'll just follow up with that question. Sarah, what do you think about that Dutch scenario?
I think flexibility is good. Assuring quality is also important. So it's a balance. There are really good international examples, as David has mentioned. But looking at the potential of things like short courses that are currently being developed, I think could solve some of this. And they're not being developed in isolation in Whitehall. They are with employers, with experts in their sectors, such as Tim and his colleagues on the construction front. So there is a lot of work going on, and we can update you in due course on it.
I guess I appreciate that, and I think redesigning the courses, makes lots of sense. But just that idea about the localization and trying to split out and give some flexibility, explicit, let's say a 20-80 split or whatever it might be, is that something that you think is a good way to head? Does that make sense?
I think looking at what happens already in many colleges, you see flexible provision, you see local context used with a national framework. So it's not quite as simple as national versus local. I think it's about finding the right training to meet the needs of those local employers. That's what's the most important thing.
Thank you. The risk of shortening the courses, if you bring everything in and make it quicker, two things might happen. The quality is going to go down, and the accidents are going to go up, because everyone's rushing through the system. They haven't got the knowledge properly, like they should have, and you might find that happens, and you've got another issue in your hands.
Yeah. Tim, do you want the final word?
Yeah, on this one. Through CLC, the Construction Leadership Council, they've recognised that this industry does not have one definition of competence. So they've spent the last 18 months across the industry. It's a fabulous collaborative programme where employers have come together to determine what competence and how we describe competence. Now we've got that, it then allows for flexibility at a local level to be able to deliver qualifications based on those competence statements. And then on top of that, if you had an appropriate assessment methodology, again, you can apply some agility into this. What you can have is a national developed programme set by employers, delivered on a local basis, but running through the core of that, you've still got those competence statements, and that will be critical to any agility that you put into a system.
Joshua, do you want to just come in briefly?
Just briefly, Sarah, FE Week have just reported today, Skills England were moving into DWP, into the new super ministry, and apprenticeships, adult further education, skills training and careers will be controlled by DWP, but responsibility for higher education, further education, training and careers for those aged 19 and under will remain under the Department for Education. Why are we splitting skills between the DWP and the Department for Education? Is this not just going to confuse everyone 10 times more than we're confused already?
So following the reshuffle and changes in ministerial responsibilities, responsibility for adult skills, yes, has moved to Secretary of State, so Department of Work and Pensions. I think the important thing to also note is the Joint Skills Minister, Jackie Smith, remains a Joint Skills Minister across DFE, Department for Education and
where's the front door? So we've spoken on this committee a number of times about the front door. I mean, you've said in the last 40 minutes you've used the word colleges, training, learning and teaching on a number of occasions. When I hear those words, I think Department for Education. Yet Skills England comes under Department for Work and Pensions. Where do people go to? Is there anyone who's actually responsible? Or is this just another area where it's going to get caught in the crossfire between ministers back and forth?
So I think the front door for skills is Skills England, and we'll continue to build that front door and make sure that we are hiding the wiring so that people can understand the system much more clearly. I think the division of responsibilities between ministers or between education and work and pensions, it actually brings some real benefits, particularly bringing skills closer to the work policy. For example, the Skills England vision is better skills for better jobs. And I think if you're seeing it through that lens, it really makes sense.
Okay, we're slightly out of time, but Tim, did you want to find a word?
Yeah, just on that point, most employers, particularly small employers, don't care where this all sits. Yeah. You know, they're really not that interested. What they want is, can I get an individual, can I get them trained? So in CITB, we set up what we call a new entrant task force. And it's a team of people that go around knocking on doors of very small businesses to say, do you want to recruit somebody? Very often the answer is yes, because they've recruited over 4,000 apprentices through this way. And they've taken all of that wiring away from them. So the team, the new entrant support team, are literally a team that takes all that wiring away, does it all for them. The only thing that we're asking of the employer that they support the learning experience and they give them good employment. That's the only thing. We've found that to be one of the most successful programmes for SMEs that we've ever done.
Okay, that's incredibly useful. Thank you so much indeed to our witnesses for helping us light up this debate. That concludes this panel. Order. Order. Welcome to this second panel in today's hearings into small business strategy. Today, in this panel, we're going to be looking in particular at the future of the high street. So thank you very much indeed for joining us. And Daniel Thompson, I wonder if I could start with you. Could you just give us a sense of your perspective on this question? Is the high street now in terminal decline, or can we reinvent it?
I think it's the latter. I think it's really about that. It's an evolution rather than it's in terminal decline. I mean, for context, I work for Greystar. We're a long-term investor. We're a rental provider of residential accommodation, both across residential but also from student housing as well. Retail is obviously part of our remit, but we really think that the evolution of that cycle, providing flexible space, is something that needs to be brought forward. So it's a move from that traditional high street. It's definitely an evolution, but it's definitely not in terminal decline.
What are the principal factors which are driving the challenges for the high street?
I think at the moment, from what we're seeing, it's the flexibility of this space. There's a lot of historic stock, and obviously the uses that are within the traditional high street are evolving. They're looking for different spaces, whether that's smaller spaces, bigger spaces. Can old buildings be repurposed to provide that flexible space? I think that's the biggest challenge that we're seeing.
Okay, and what's getting in the way of what's creating that inflexibility?
I think from what we've seen is it's really the viability challenges that we're seeing at the moment, and it's the ability to kind of get from a start to a construction to allow occupation, and that process over the last 24, 36 months has become prolonged, and that leading to that uncertainty, that's what's on our side holding up development.
Okay, so it's just too expensive to reformat things given the yield that there may be ahead.
I think that's part of it, but it's also just the uncertainty, the timing to go through from a planning perspective to then line up tenants, to then work out through the work. Obviously, there are cost challenges as well at the moment. So those are all the factors that are kind of delaying to the point where it's taking longer to get to site. That uncertainty, both from a landlord's perspective, but also from a tenant's perspective, I think it's just that uncertainty that creates the issues.
Okay, so the base of future yields is in question, and you've got a ton of risk as well to navigate. Okay. John McGinty, do you recognise that analysis?
I think I would agree that the high street is changing rather than in terminal decline. It's certainly the 20th century was one of, initially department stores and then chain stores, and obviously we're all shopping in different ways now, particularly since the pandemic. So I think the high street is still thriving, but it is having to adapt and quite rapidly adapt to a changing world. Just to illustrate an example of Daniel's point, we had a lovely Art Deco Debenhams building in Gloucester, obviously closed at the same time as all the other Debenhams stores closed. Our university took ownership of that building, have repurposed it into a new city centre campus, which is bringing a whole different footfall and driving other tenants into other void properties in the city. The NHS have also stepped in with a health and wellbeing suite in the same building, and the council library is moving into the same building. So, old department stores are being repurposed in different ways throughout the country.
So what you're describing there is the kind of agglomeration of demand using novel strategies to basically bring a concentration of people.
The reason why people come to city centres is changing. I think that's the key point, is that the nature of retail has changed, and so what we are trying to do as place shapers in our cities and towns is trying to find alternative purposes for reasons for people to come into our city centres. So it's things like leisure, it's things like other destination. Council put a lot of effort into activation of the city centre, and we're seeing the revival, I think, of city centre living in some of our rural towns and cities, which was previously sort of occupied by retail and other purposes, because that provides a sort of evening economy angle to it, so that the city centres try and remain vibrant in the evening as well as during the daytime.
What are the key things that are driving the decline of the current model?
So in terms of some of the challenges, viability is definitely one that I recognise.
Do you want to just translate that into words I would use down the Hunter's Moon in Hodge Hill?
Okay. Gloucester is a very historic city. As Daniel said, we've got a lot of heritage buildings, got hundreds of heritage buildings, and the cost of regenerating them and repurposing them is quite challenging. We've had some success. The example I gave you with the Debenhams building, but also another building that the council is involved with private sector partners, is being regenerated with the help of levelling up funding from government. The cost of if you dig in Gloucester, you basically hit a Roman body or a medieval body. So the cost of remediation, the brownfield land remediation is significant if you've got a city with either contamination or heritage to remediate when you're trying to knock down a building and regenerate.
Okay, so in terms of the main barriers getting in the way of regeneration, does it simply come down to the availability of finance to deal with some of those constraints?
That's problem number one.
Yeah.
Problem number two is diverse land ownership. So one of the challenges we have when we try and regenerate some of our streets is trying to understand who the landlords are, and sometimes not just being diverse but very distant. You know, we have a lot of international absentee landlords, and trying to get...
Just help us understand this problem, because you know, this was the country that invented the Domesday Book. Yep. So, you know, we've been pretty good at property records for a long time. Yep. How is it that we don't know who...
We know, so we are trying to do a master plan for a part of our city. Yep. We know who all the book owners are of each property, but we're writing to overseas addresses and we're not getting any responses, and we have very little way to follow that up to try and actually get some action to do some coordinated work in that street. Your last fallback option then is compulsory purchase activity. That is very challenging, particularly for councils. We find there are a lot of legal and financial challenges. You don't find many councils doing a lot of work in the compulsory purchase order space because of the challenges that we face using those powers.
Okay. What else would be on your list of barriers?
So the other thing I'd probably highlight is permitted development rights. So these are powers to convert premises that are, you know, retail or commercial into residential. In of itself, it's a good thing. I think we're keen to see more city centre living because it does create eyes on the street, and it creates a new life for our high streets. But what we are seeing in practice is very poorly brought forward proposals that we have no power to have any say over. These are buildings that don't meet space standards, that don't have any daylight, they have shared kitchens. They are not places that people would choose to live in, and they're just really cheap options to regenerating our high streets in creative and value-added ways. And so I think the nature of the permitted development rights in themselves are a good thing, but the nature of the ways in which they currently operate is not helping us.
Okay. Nick Plum, what's your perspective on this first question as to why our high streets are in decline?
Yes, so I think I agree with my fellow panellists that I don't think the high street's in terminal decline. I do think that the kind of retail-dominated model of the high street is in terminal decline, and I think... I think the retail-dominated model is over. And I just want to start with a few bits of kind of data which I think bring this to life. So firstly, just kind of public sentiment on the state of the high street. Power to Change did polling with More in Common at the back end of last year. 73% of people think the high street has gotten worse in recent years. The nature of the way we shop is changing completely, has changed completely. We're looking at 27% of retail sales being online today. That was 2.6% in 2006. That's a huge change. Some estimates have looked at there being a kind of 40% oversupply of retail space across the country, which I think is a real kind of indicative figure of the way that our high streets are changing and need to continue to change. So for Power to Change, we've been around 10 years, worked with community-led business, so locally rooted, locally accountable organisations which trade for the benefit of their community. And we think that there's a kind of, not a community, we think a community-led model is the way forward, not communities doing everything themselves, but recognising that people want a stake and a say in what their high streets and town centres feel and look like. These are really important spaces and places for people. They have historic relevance and real emotive kind of sense for people in their local areas. So one of the things that we've been working on in recent years is some of the ways that communities can transform their high streets in partnership with local authorities, developers and others.
Any other barriers to regeneration that you would flag?
Yeah, so I think as well as working at Power to Change, I was also on the board of the previous government's High Streets Task Force. One of the most enlightening bits of data from the work that High Streets Task Force did for me, which was going across the country and working with towns on their regeneration plans and working out what the challenges they were facing were. 60% of places cited lack of strong partnerships in place as one of the barriers that was preventing them from doing more. So,
what does that mean?
So,
lack of strong partnerships.
So, I think
between who?
From our perspective, I think it's in some ways maybe slightly crude to divide things into community, council, private sector, but broadly those three categories of players that have an interest in the nature of the town centre or high street, and often, not always, often slightly different drivers in the behaviour of those different players, and so getting those three groups together in a productive way, I think, is where we see some of that was lacking, and that's what came up through the High Streets Task Force.
Sonia Kumar.
Thank you, Chair. The local data company nationally found that the final quarter 2023 that one in seven shops was closed, and in Dudley, in my constituency, every 35 shops are empty. And it attracts all sorts of antisocial behaviour, and it just makes the town a lot less attractive. How do you think we can incentivise people to invest in bricks and mortar over online, and how do we make sure that the field is actually level playing field for both?
Yeah.
So I'll go with Nick.
I can go first, yeah. So I think certainly one of the things that we hear when we speak to community businesses is that the kind of traditional business rates regime isn't working, too expensive, too costly. We think that the proposals to change the business rates regime and in favour of bricks and mortar businesses is a good step. One of the things that we see as a potential challenge is the definitions of kind of retail, hospitality, leisure. There are often some of the groups that we work with that slip between the cracks a little bit there. So often the organisations we work with, community-led businesses that have multi-purpose use, it's often not clear on the ways that you can the ways that these organisations are categorised. So for us, we'd like to see a business rates relief regime that recognised social purpose businesses that have an asset lock, so community benefit societies, community interest companies.
So spending reviews coming up, what would you say to the Chancellor?
So I would say that one of the things that we've been really pleased with at Power to Change is the proposed introduction of a community right to buy through the English Devolution Bill. We see that as having real potential to bring forward both negotiated sales, which is often what's happened in Scotland, north of the border, where they have the community right to buy, and also in cases where assets are sitting vacant for a long time, that it has the ability to kind of move things in the right direction. But we're really keen to see funding and support sit alongside that new right so that communities can take advantage of those powers when they come on stream. Can I just check though,
John McGinty, you said that there is a real problem with vacant landlords, people who own property who are impossible to track down. Just how does that interact, Nick, with the ambition for community right to buy if you can't actually find someone to buy it from?
Yeah, and I was going to get on to the kind of question of property ownership being and it being quite opaque, that being a key barrier for us as well. I think one of the things that we were pleased to see the previous government introduce, but I'm yet to see it have the impact that we would hope, is the beneficial of
register of beneficial
register of beneficial ownership. I think there's more that government could do to push that to be actually enforced, because I think, so often the tale that we hear from community-led businesses is that they do painstaking work to work out how a property might be owned within a trust, within another trust. They eventually get get in touch with the owner and have managed to negotiate sales and then done amazing things in terms of turning those around. But I completely agree that the community right to buy is obviously reliant on the asset owner wanting to sell. Yeah.
The only problem with the community right to buy, which I think is a fantastic thing going for the devolution bill, but most of the time communities struggle with financing this. How do you think we can sort of have a solution? How do you think we can break those barriers?
Yeah, so I guess I'd slightly challenge the view that communities struggle to raise finance. I think it's something that they require support on, and the community ownership fund that the previous government introduced was a really good example of the ways in which public money, so community ownership funding was via the form of grant, also leveraged in lots of private and community investment, so whether that was through charitable funders, through loan, also through the kind of often the community share model where communities are going out to their community, selling shares to local members. That's a great way of raising funding. So I think the model that we would like to see for any future community ownership funding is one that recognises there's a kind of a cocktail of funding that communities can pull together, but the public funding can be a real anchor for some of that.
Okay.
Thank you. Just, I think, picking up on the point that you made in the beginning, and I'll start with you, Nick, and then I'll come to the panellists because I know that they will have something to add here. You know, the partnerships that we know we need to work because between everybody you can get more things achieved. Yeah. So I think you've already mentioned that there's a scepticism there. So the question around how effective are they at the moment and what those barriers are is partly what we're interested in. But I'm also interested in how different places will have very different outcomes. You know, if you take Tamworth, we have a borough council. They're small. They do a lot of work to try and make sure they're working with the community, but they're limited. You know, and the way that councils have been reduced in their ability sometimes to scale some of these over the last few years with the funding challenge means that they may have, you know, the intentions to, but they're still sort of struggling. So that's why it's so important to have those, you know, partnerships with the private, but also the community needs to have ownership and it needs to feel it has agency. So could you talk a bit more about, and you might have some examples, and certainly I'd be interested in your experience from Gloucester as well in terms of what you've been doing as well. So could I start with you, Nick? Is that all right?
Yeah, so examples of partnership and where it's working well.
Yeah. Or not.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You know,
yeah. So I guess a couple of examples that I'd like to draw on. This is something that I mentioned I was in the English Devolution Bill Committee earlier today, and I mentioned the same example, but I think it is a really interesting one. One of the things that Power to Change has been calling for is for something we call a community covenant, which is a kind of partnership that involves local authority, in some cases town and parish council, voluntary and community sector organisations. The example that I drew on earlier and will draw on now is from a place called Market Drayton in Shropshire, where the group there involves 20 organisations from across the town who are all interested in the development of a family and community hub. One of the bits of feedback that we've had from the local authority is that there was a bit of scepticism initially because it was a real task of kind of letting go of some control and engaging on an equal footing with these 20 partners. The feedback that we've had since is that this has felt like a real gift. That's the language that they've used for the council, because it feels like they've been able to get more done over a short period of time than they would have if it was the council holding things themselves. So that's something that we would like to see replicated elsewhere. We think the English Devolution Bill could help bring that into being with new layers of neighbourhood governance. So for me it's really about that engaging on the equal footing from the very beginning feels really important, and we'd like to see more of that.
Thank you. And so, John, I think you also gave a bit of an example of where you'd amalgamated. So have you got some thoughts to share on that point as well?
Well, I mean, Gloucester's not much bigger than Tamworth as a council. We're at the same budget, but we've just recently completed a £100 million regeneration scheme in the city centre in partnership with a private sector partner and with some help from government through the Levelling Up Fund. So I think, small district councils can be ambitious. One of the keys, I think, to partnership that we found, and one of the barriers that we've helped overcome, is landholding. So the city council has taken ownership of 2 of the big shopping centres in the city centre. And we did that not because we've got some balming idea that retail is going to suddenly make a comeback, but because we see them as cornerstones to place shaping and using them to drive the regeneration. And our private sector partners, the Reef Group in the case of the Forum development, have also taken a significant land holding. So there has been a shared vision for the place. There's been partnership, ownership, commitment through ownership, and that has helped transform that particular development. In 20 years ago, we had a Heritage Urban Regeneration Corporation, and that similar to the mayoral development corporations that are being talked about in the new bill. And I think those are good things as well. That helped, in our case, regenerate the rundown docks area of Gloucester, in a significant partnership with the Peel Group. But the Peel Group only came to Gloucester because the council was willing to commit funds and resources and to be the anchor tenant in the docks regeneration. And that was what was enabled Peel to have the confidence to invest in the city alongside us. So partnerships are key. We've done some stuff I could also talk about in terms of sort of how we've got round the voids thing with some community groups, and that the business rates system does need looking at to enable sort of pop-ups and community groups to make use of void premises. But partnerships are definitely key, but you don't have to be big to have successful partnerships.
Thank you. Daniel, did you want to add anything on that?
I think from our side, Greenford Quay, one of our big developments, which is in Ealing, that's a great example of exactly what we've talked about here, is partnerships. But I think as part of it, to go back to the original question about the high street, it's residential definitely is part of that, bringing forward that critical mass. But it's interesting when you look at some of our residents coming in, one of the first questions they'll be asking is, what's the retail that's available? So it becomes a bit of a chicken and egg. And you've got to get to that critical mass to be able to say, right, the retail can support itself. And the residents can equally say, I want to move in, I'm not going to wait for phase 2 when whatever services are delivered. And I think as part of that, it's a 26-acre estate, it's open up to the public. There are community facilities brought into part of that as well. So there's a school, there's a health centre. And over the sort of 9 years to date of the life of that project, those needs have changed about the timing as to when that school could come forward or whether the health centre could come forward. And that's not just our development influencing that, it's the wider community as well. And so we've had a great partnership with Ealing and the GLA to really work at that, to say how can we work together. And then just picking up on your point about the funding side of it, it's been really useful to say to the local residents, there's a nearby playground that we were going to refurbish as part of it. There's a new level crossing to make access to that much better. And we've been able to allocate and ring fence our Section 106 contributions to deliver that. And so suddenly the council and the community groups can say, we're going to get that. We can see the timing. And there's a fair trade-off to say, at what point during the lifestyle, because ours is a multi-phase development because of the size of it, at what point can those facilities come? And I think it's that stakeholder engagement. It just allows them to see that it's not just residential that's coming in and I don't get anything out of it. It's the residential, I understand now.
This is a really important lesson. Can I just check though, for many people, particularly those in the statistics that Nick Plum quoted, the high street will be actually quite a small parade of shops in quite a rundown place in a derelict precinct that is ridden with crime, with no CCTV, and it will feel basically out of control. The kind of partnerships that you're describing are alluring, but what is the minimum size to get a partnership away of a scale that you would be interested in?
I guess from our perspective, Greenford is a 2,000 unit redevelopment, 26 acres. I say it's a large scale one, but equally we could be a much smaller provision of that, but it would need other neighbouring developments to kind of come forward. And I think that's where the partnership kind of comes forward. And that's where I think where there's multiple site owners, you do need the local authority to take that lead to be able to say, let's bring it together, and maybe there's a considered master plan between various developers. But it's that proactive approach, and equally as part of that, Ealing were great at coming to the table to say, what we want to see out of this development is these facilities, is it retail? There were small centres nearby, but they didn't want to be overshadowed. So again, it's getting that right balance. And I think as part of that, the conversation was that the ground floor activation that we both mentioned, that doesn't just have to be retail. That can be residential, that can be servicing, it can be other opportunities that are in there. And I think it's been a little bit where we've seen on some schemes where there's almost an over-provision of retail because it's ground floor, it needs to be activated, it's therefore retail is the only answer. I think that, going back to the terminal decline point, that's the evolution that you're seeing, that needs to change.
Thank you. Alison Griffiths.
It's following on your point there, Chair, Mr McGinty, when you were talking about what you were doing in Gloucester, it did strike me that you are a decent-sized city, and I really want to sort of re-emphasise the same point that the Chair was making, that in my constituency of Bognor Regis and Littlehampton, we have two much smaller towns. We have two town councils who are doing their very best, but the kind of purchase by the council of the types of buildings that you're talking about, or entering into property partnerships in the way that you're talking about, they feel quite a long way away from where we're at the moment, and particularly with HMOs being approved in the area. And I think the concern that the Chair made, that we have town centres where communities are actually worried about going into those town centres at the moment. And so I think for the more typical, and I think I'm sort of looking around the room, but I think a more typical town centre is going to be much smaller, and we would really welcome your thoughts on I suppose the stepping stones to getting the finance in place. So for a much smaller area, how do we go about getting the finance in place to even think about purchasing these properties? And once you do you go bankrupt if the plan doesn't come through? So how much risk are these town councils expected to take?
So I would describe it as a calculated risk. So if to give another town example, Stroud, which is near Gloucester, is about the same size as Bognor, and they are also doing some significant regeneration work there. So again, I would make the point that scale is not necessarily the barrier, but yes, you do have to take calculated risk. When we purchased the shopping centres, we knew that the day of retail was going, so we were purchasing them to think, what is our regeneration ambition? You know, what do we do with these as and when the retailers move out? In the City Council's case, we've actually moved into the offices above the shopping centre. So we've gone out of the Civic Suite and we've moved into the shopping centre and repurposed them. And you can repurpose estates in any size town in that way. So, but in terms of the sort of minimum size question, you know, I think Daniel's point is key. Is you need enough. People will not move to go back to living in the town centre unless they know where their school is, where their doctor is, where their dentist is, where their shops are. The shops are the easy bit to tick, but you know, those public services do need to be part of the conversation. So it can't just be the council operating on its own. It has to be coordinated with lots of public services to say, actually, you know, and you might need a minimum size to actually reopen a school in the town centre. So you do need all the partnerships, all the agencies working together, and you need, you know, the power of one of the reasons why I think small district councils do quite well at this is they are passionate about their place and they understand their place, and they have a great power of convening to bring different partners together into a place to talk about its future.
Sure, Reynolds.
Thank you, Chair. John, Daniel was talking about chicken and egg, and that, but I think there's also the chicken and egg in the sense that retailers won't move into a town because there's not the footfall there. People won't go to a town centre because there's not the retailers there. So that says that we need to have more events and things going on in town centres. Is the answer to that just business improvement districts?
So again, just to give you an example, in Gloucester, we had to show a demonstration of faith to enable our private sector partnerships, REEF, to see that we were committed to that part of the city centre. And so we spent £5 million on the public realm in an area called King Square, where we reintroduced fountains for the kids to play in, very sort of Mediterranean cosmopolitan feel. But they needed to see the council put its money where its mouth was, and there's no profit for private developers in public realms. So they are looking for the public sector to do those sorts of investments, and if you do those sorts of investments with the right private sector partner, they will move in with you and they will see that there is that shared vision and belief in the city centre or the town centre.
One of the challenges out there is the £5 million worth of capital. Local authorities are going through a time of it at the moment. I'm assuming that was probably something like cell funding or cell monies at some point.
So I think in that particular case we generated a capital receipt by disposing of a building somewhere else and reinvesting it in that part of the city, because that was our regeneration ambition.
Okay. How would you approach then? Obviously, town centre and city centre developments for developers are probably some of the most expensive to be able to try and do. It's brownfield site, so obviously you've got added cost. Property prices are high in the town centre anyway, so having an old building that you're trying to then buy to knock down is challenging. How would you come across then the challenge of wanting a really purpose-built, beautiful building that works for the town centre, but challenges with viability, with affordable housing contributions? Where's the give and take, do you think, for a local authority?
It's hard to sort of give a generalised answer there. Each case is on its merits. We've had to sacrifice some of the...
There's a vote in the House on the 10-minute rule bill. Those who need to vote can vote, but the Labour members are not required to vote, and so we will continue to sit as we shall be quorate. So do continue.
I'm going to be one of those that's got to run though, so
right.
Apologies.
So there are trade-offs in terms of what you're trying to achieve in a place with Section 106 contributions, SIL contributions. You know, viability challenges are across the piece, and it hasn't been easy to get, a £100 million regeneration scheme off the ground. But with the combination of some levelling up funding, ambition and capital from the council, ambition and capital from the private sector partner, and a very robust, business planning process, we've managed to get it over the line.
You've told us a very positive story about Gloucester, but you also vice-chair the District Council's network. What would be some of the challenges that your colleagues in District Council land would highlight in bringing forward schemes like this?
So I suppose one of the concerns I have with the structural changes that are going on in local government at the moment is that the convening power is moving further away from the place. A lot of power is going to the strategic mayoral authorities. So in Gloucester's case, that might be the mayor, that's currently sitting in Bristol. And we are then fighting with Bristol, Weston-super-Mare, Bath, all these other places around there to try and work out how much regeneration does Gloucester need in that bigger scale of things. So at the moment, you have a council that is solely focused on Gloucester, passionate about the place, understands the community networks that, and has created a compelling vision for that place. I suppose my concern and the concern of District Council network is that with the move of sort of local growth planning and regeneration funding to strategic mayoral authorities, that some of that local passion and some of the smaller towns and cities may not succeed when they're part of a bigger discussion.
What is needed is double devolution to mayoral authorities and mayoral authorities down to districts.
Possibly.
If not lower.
Yeah, I mean, I think the power that districts have is they have absolute passion for their place. So even without strategic mayoral authorities, I think districts have always shown more inclination to do economic growth and regeneration projects than county council have in two-tier areas. So I think district councils and unitaries have shown a passion for a place that isn't necessarily exhibited at higher levels because they have broader sets of responsibilities and a broader geography.
Weston.
Thank you, Chair. When I talk to businesses in my constituency of Warwick and Leamington, the points that come up from all those in the centre of the town are concerns really about rents, of course, business rates, parking, a few other issues. And I am surprised how little I've heard from the three of you about those points. 6 years ago, I remember asking Mike Ashley the question, who was in a similar committee, about why, if you allow change of use, what will happen? And he said, well, of course, what will happen is that you'll support the rents in a town centre. If the market should be allowed to run, wouldn't rents come down and actually make it a more level playing field between out of town and in town? Nick Plum.
So I think there's been some evidence that has happened, that is happening. So I think one of the things you may be referring to is the provision in the English Devolution and Community Empowerment Bill about upward rent reviews. I think we've seen some evidence of a kind of recognition across the market that rates in kind of rents within town centres have ended up being too high, and so negotiations between asset owners and occupiers leading to lower rents. There's also provision in the English Devolution and Community Empowerment Bill to stop the ability to insert clauses into contracts around upward rent reviews, which, from our perspective, I think, we don't hold a strong view on that. We certainly hear from community businesses that there is a challenge around getting the balance right between the rates that community groups are able to pay and the rates that asset owners are looking to rent buildings on.
Daniel Thompson.
I think where we've seen it is, again, using Greenford as a good example, is and going back to your point about 5 million on public realm, we will happily front load our public realm because we want to establish the place, get it going. And at Greenford there's a large central square which allows events to be run on. That's both our events and community events. But to your point, there is a point where short term, can you actually point at that profit of that money? Probably not. But actually longer term, you'll definitely see the value come in. But when you question overall scheme viability, and this comes back to retail as well, that we're having to push the schemes to be able to stack up from an affordable housing viability question. If we could widen that viability question to include retail and public realm and front loading of those spaces and broaden that out to say that you might not have as much affordable housing, but we're going to focus on that retail is part of that placemaking community environment. If all part of that, I think you could definitely do that.
We used to be a nation of shopkeepers, apparently, John McGinty. Aren't we denying all manner of citizens the right to, or the opportunity to have their own business on the high street by the current system?
So I think the point that fellow panellists were making earlier is that the business rate system does not effectively support that. There is an imbalance between online trading and bricks and mortar trading. And that's the fundamental challenge. For as long as it's cheaper to just operate out of your bedroom, you will operate out of your bedroom or a shed. So
understand.
So something needs to be done.
We need to sort out rents. We need to sort out business rates. What else?
Well, I mean, in terms of parking, I would say connectivity is an issue. So good places, good towns and cities need to have good connectivity. It needs to be easy for people to get in there, and people, when they get in there, need to feel safe and secured. So those are two other key metrics. So again, in Gloucester's case, without wishing to go on about Gloucester, but I will, but we invested in the bus station. We built a new bus station because we saw that as, even though we're not a transport authority, we saw that as key to having a welcoming environment for our customers and our public to come and
So a good town centre would have really good connectivity,
yep,
easy access, public transport, and
a reset of the business rate system so that the imbalance between online and bricks and mortar is rebalanced in a way.
So one thing that I wanted to highlight, building on some of those conversations earlier, in relation to kind of how you get the conditions right for big regeneration. I think the other way that I think it's important to look at this question is about, so to your question, Matt Weston, around what's needed. I think high vacancy has the potential to lead to a spiral of decline, right? The kind of chicken and egg question. If people don't feel it's a viable place to invest, then vacancy can go up, and we've seen that so many times. One of the things that I think has a real role to play, and we've seen this in some of the places we've worked, is kind of really effective use of meanwhile use. So if you have a property sitting vacant, how can you activate that for a year, 2, so that it ups people's ambitions for the town centre? We've seen a great example of this in Bristol, not always seen as a struggling place, but the Broadmead shopping centre area of Bristol is one that suffered from antisocial behaviour and decline. An organisation there has moved into an old Marks and Spencer's store. It's now called Sparks, and it has a whole range of community-led activity in there, which is slowly changing people's perceptions of that high street and town centre, and thinking that this is a place to invest rather than a place to withdraw from.
Thank you very much indeed. That's been extremely helpful. Thank you very much indeed. If there's any further case studies in particular of how deal structures have been stacked up, and observations on some of the things that would perhaps have made those deals easier to get over the line, we'd be really grateful for that evidence. But that concludes this panel. Order. Thank you very much indeed. Panel of the Business and Trade Committee's hearings into small business strategy. Thank you to our final panel of witnesses for joining us. Lydia, I'm going to start with you. Just how is business?
I'm afraid it's not all good news. A simple answer to that is they're in hospitality, 84,000 job losses since April 1st. What does that mean to me personally? I used to hire 50 people. I have 3 cafes in the Midlands. Yeah. We're down to 45. Look at that.
You almost halved your workforce.
No, from 50 to 45.
55 to 45, sorry. Yeah.
So this happened as a result of minimum wage increase. I don't think that's a problem, by the way. And then national insurance contributions all overnight. My business had to try and find £38,000. In the climate, what we have, I just did a week-on-week example of last week's revenue versus the same week in the previous year. Yeah. It was 14% down on revenue and 29% down on footfall. Bearing in mind that the industry on average has increased prices by at least 6%. The maths isn't really maths. Yeah. And what I think is important to mention there is that in that climate where you're seeing a decrease in revenue, the only option was to shed people. And I mean, I hire 50 people, 45 people, but also in my wider role as a representative of the Birmingham Hospitality Collective, I have easy access to hundreds of other hospitality vendors and operators. And I'm not alone. I have operators saying they're regularly not taking money out of their business, regularly doing things like remortgaging their houses. So business is down and we're trying to save jobs. We don't want that to be the answer. What I also did as well, which I think is useful, is I put together some case studies of how we would make that money up, as an example. We sell coffee, we sell cake, we sell food. So if we were to try and make this up and save those jobs, just to stay in the same place, not to grow, not to make more profit, to stay in the same place from pre-April 1st, a cafe, a reasonably busy cafe, would have to sell an additional 400 croissants. Now, you look surprised. Does anybody here know how many croissants a cafe usually sells a month? Usually a busy cafe outside of London, 300 croissants a month would be pretty good. So you're asking for a 133% increase in a particular product in a climate where I've just told you we've got a 14% decrease in revenue and a 29% decrease in footfall. Yeah. So it breaks my heart to sit in front of people and make them redundant and not give them jobs, but that has been the unfortunate answer in order to stay alive.
Yeah, thank you. Morgan, what's your experience?
Yeah, I can absolutely echo what Lydia's just said. Representing the pub sector, we're seeing a lot of that anecdotally from our members. So the point that Lydia made at the end about over trading is something that we're really trying to get across, because for every £5 cost increase, it's not just selling one extra pint, it's selling 42 extra pints to make up that £5. So that over trading thing is something that we're really trying to impress on you. And a lot of it is down to employment as well. So employment costs are up, energy costs are still very high, and business rates as well. So the budget last year in the autumn 2024 added £650 million onto the sector. So that is hitting pubs, and it is resulting in people having to make difficult choices like employing fewer people, opening for fewer days, closing early, not opening their kitchens because they can't afford to turn on the ovens. So you're really getting a lot of those difficult decisions that change the fundamental offer that a pub can bring to their community, whether it's the amount of people they can employ or just the number of events they can host or people they can serve. So it is getting quite difficult for pubs as well.
And are you seeing the same kind of decline in sales?
It really depends. So pubs are so seasonal. They're also so location specific. So you might find it difficult to believe that pub footfall has changed at all if you go out in the city on a Thursday, for example. But in communities, it is certainly going to be a different story depending on where you are. Of course, the weather is a really big deal for pubs. So if you have a great summer like we've had the last few months, that's great. But the second the weather starts turning, footfall goes down. So it really is on a case-by-case basis. But what we also want to impress is it's not for lack of people supporting their pubs. It's for every pound that comes in, more goes out in bills and costs. So it is the cost of doing business, not the actual model, that's in trouble. Yeah.
Stephen, what's going on in your world?
Yeah, thanks very much, and thank you for inviting me to join you today. I'm not going to go over what has already been stated. I think hospitality is a standalone issue, separate to retail, and I think we probably need a separate session on it because 40 minutes isn't going to be enough. I sit here today representing Scottish Hospitality Group. However, I do have a small business of my own in a rural part of Scotland.
Just a sense of what's going on in your business.
Yeah, so
backwards from that.
Going to costs, 2 weeks ago I had to work a full week in my own restaurant as well as having to do other things. But if I give you an idea, 76 hours that week as a small business, I work myself. So with what I take out of that business a week on a weekly wage, that worked out £3.16 a week an hour. So I chastise anybody to say that they work for £3.16 an hour and then expect to make a profit. It doesn't happen. When we talk about footfall and people spend per head, if I look on my own business from last year against this year, just as Lydia was saying, £4.73 roughly, the spend per head is down. Yeah. So for me, that equates to just over 100,000 a year. Yeah. But yet, we had the colossal increase on employers' national insurance. I am now looking at, before I go into my new financial year, paying probably 2 off out of my 14 staff that I have employed just now to make that. Now, where do I make up the hours? I'm currently working from a Wednesday to a Sunday. I don't open Monday, Tuesday. I didn't come into this business to open 5 days a week. But the affordability is not there for me to open Monday, Tuesday, which goes to the point we were making earlier on. Hospitality is on the high street. It's 7 days a week. People come into our high streets, nowhere's open on Monday, Tuesday, and that's becoming the norm now. Yeah. That's not good for tourism. But we're different from the Royal Mile to where I am in rural parts of Scotland. Yeah. Far, far different, although the issues are still the same.
And do you have a sense of what is driving that decline in spend?
Yeah, I think there's 2 parts to that. I think that there's the difference in discretionary spend and essential spend. Mm-hmm. Your essential spend is going to a supermarket and you have to spend. And I always use the same issue where if I've got my ceiling's leaking in my restaurant and I've got a plumber to call out because there's a leaking pipe in the roof and he says I'm £50 an hour, you have no choice but to pay that £50 an hour. Otherwise, you're needing so many other people to fix the problem.
Yeah.
That same plumber comes into my restaurant and I'm £40 for a full of steak. He goes, hang on a wee second. Where are you getting £40 from? And I said, well, are you telling me that my employees are less qualified and less professional than what you are to fill my, to fix a leaking pipe? No, they're not. Yeah. The person that shakes a cocktail or cooks a done full of steak is far same professional as anybody else in the sector. And I think that's what we need to get back to, is the professionalism that comes across in hospitality, not just a one-stop job.
Can I just check, Lydia, do you recognise that analysis when it comes to the decline in sales and spend per customer? What do you think is going on there?
I think that everybody is seeing the cost of living, or the impact of the cost of living crisis. Yeah. Even in one of my cafes in Leamington Spa, notoriously quite affluent, massive decrease in footfall. Everybody's having to watch where they spend their money. But at the same time, we're having to increase our prices to cover all of these costs we just talked about. So we're outpricing ourselves, and it seems counterintuitive because we have no choice. I can't sell an avocado smash, for example, for less than £12, but people they're like £12 for an avocado smash. That's wild. But actually, UKHospitality released some really interesting figures, I think earlier in the week, about profit left on dishes. If I look at that in particular, £2.40 of it goes to the government, 88p of that stays with me. Yeah. But I can't charge any more. So this is the problem. We're outpricing ourselves. People don't want to come in, but we have to charge that much to try and keep the doors open.
What have you had to do to, say, a price of a cup of coffee?
Coffee, we increased everything by around about 5 to 6% as a minimum. Yeah. But I mean, where we are, I guess, slightly luckier with that is that coffee, generally, everyone kind of charges the same amount. Yeah. People point to that a little bit less, I think.
Some of the evidence we heard when we were touring the country, talking to small businesses, revealed that people felt they were at that price point where they just couldn't put prices up anymore. So people would talk about a £5 flat white or a £10 pint, and they just said, look, we're now at the limits of just what more we can charge. Is that an analysis you recognise?
If anything, I think we've already gone past it because the fact that people are voting with their feet. People aren't coming in as much. Like my flagship store in Leamington was rocking. People used to queue to get into that place. I was proud that we created this vibe. And now, on a Saturday, you could walk in and get a table, no problem, and that is wild. We just, like I said before, people are voting with their feet. We can't keep increasing prices. And I do also mirror what my colleague here said about how we're different to other industries.
Yeah. I think just on that as well, just want to interrupt there, the thing about that is what we're seeing on the decrease in spend is there is still an appetite by people to come out and socialise because we are social animals by nature.
Exactly.
However, what's happening is we see it in our own business where and everybody else across the panel probably say the same. People are coming out, instead of having 3 courses, they're having 2. Instead of having that second glass of wine, they're having 1. They're asking for that extra bottle of free water at the table because they still want to sit down and socialise. And that's one of the biggest problems. And when you have that, and the added costs that the businesses have, whether it be utilities, the absolutely devastation of the employers' national insurance contributions on every single small business, where is the risk now? The risk for employers is in taking more people on because we don't want to be remortgaging our houses. Businesses don't want to do that. We want to make a profit. We have to make 2 profits. One to keep the business going and the other to actually keep our own mortgages and our own business, our own houses, our own finances in order. And I think that gets missed by so many people.
Yeah. Thank you for setting the stage for us. Matt Weston.
Thank you, Chair. So just to pick up on a couple of points, and really the 2024 budget, you've clearly articulated some of the pressures that's brought. Just interested to know some of the challenges that may have also been contributing to the viability of business prior to the 2024 budget. Maybe start with you, Morgan, just in terms of the pub sector and just what those pub businesses were facing post-COVID and so on, and other heights.
Yeah, absolutely. So post-COVID, the biggest issues, as we remember, were high inflation. So that was mainly manifesting in the cost of food and the cost of beer. So wheat prices were high. Energy prices are high. Brewing is a very energy-intensive sector, so when energy prices are high, it costs more to produce beer.
Would many of your pubs, do you reckon, have taken out loans, especially for some of the energy hikes that they saw?
I wouldn't have that figure to hand. I can see if I can get it for you. But what we were hearing was that energy at the time, in kind of peak energy crisis, probably 2022, that was by far the biggest single issue was energy. And it was crisis for a lot of businesses because their contracts ran out. They had to get a new contract and they had to take what they were given. And it's possible that they were locked in for a few years at a time in that instance. So while we see that kind of that immediate crisis of energy has passed, energy bills are still running at least 2.5 times what they have been historic levels. And again, going back to my point about how many days a week you open, every time you decide to open the door, whether or not there's anyone in your pub, you're paying for the electricity, you're paying for the kitchen to be turned on, you're paying for the heating in the winter. So all of that really comes back to the overall cost of doing business, the amount that you have going out before that first customer even comes in to buy a pint. So energy is definitely one of those big ones, and costs of food and drink, which are now structurally higher after that period. Even though inflation has gone down, throughout the whole supply chain, things are just more expensive.
Thank you. Lydia, any other costs that are really bearing down on the business?
I mean, I can mirror about cost of goods having increased. We notoriously sell much less meat, as an example, which actually the knock-on effect of that is, because we used to use a local butcher, we're giving them less business. The knock-on effect goes on and on and on. But again, we either outprice ourselves or we make these sort of decisions. The thing about energy prices, and I mean, it's a big deal. It really is, especially pre-2024. One of my sites is a wholesale bakery. We went from £1,800 a month to £3,500 a month, and we still pay that to this day. And that's basically 2 bakers' salaries, which then means that affects how much we can produce and then affects revenue. So again, we're talking about knock-on effect. But I don't really want to get lost in energy prices, because that is something that affects a lot of industries. And I think we're all here today to talk about specifically hospitality.
Completely.
It's wild.
I think it's just those other additional pressures on the sector in terms of the margins may have been reasonable.
Already tight, absolutely, yeah.
It's slim, but actually putting a lot of pressure on. What about COVID loans? Is that something that you can relate to? Outstanding COVID loans that you may have taken out across the sectors?
Unfortunately, I didn't take any, so I can't speak on
this. Can I come in on this? Yes, to make the distinction, COVID loans which were structured as a predictable interest rate loan which can be paid off over time, that has been more bearable. For businesses which are sort of medium-sized and up, where the structure was a floating rate above base. Look, hindsight's a powerful thing, but if you take yourself back to 2020 to 2021, it would have been rational to assume inflation after the pandemic, because you have constrained supply, demand builds up, you get inflation afterwards. For sure, there are a lot of businesses which are in effect at the moment zombie businesses purely servicing debt, because it is higher than it was anticipated when it was taken on. Very briefly, there is a very, simple, there's an achievable solution to that, which is to convert that debt into something that feels a lot more like a non-voting preference share, with either a limited coupon or just delayed to the end of the term, which would have 2 benefits, wouldn't it? One, it would allow businesses to invest in growth so that they could pay it back. 2, it helps with the balance sheet design. But we are absolutely in a situation where some of our mid-sized hospitality businesses are at the moment structurally unprofitable because of unexpectedly expensive debt.
We would benefit from a short paper on that as a committee.
Do that tomorrow, yeah.
Thank you.
I think we're seeing a lot of businesses, and Al and I had a brief chat with this outside earlier on, who are now at the point where, well, not just now, probably over the last year, who are at the end of their CapEx schedule. They're now looking to reinvest to, do whatever they need to do to make the place look better and attractive for the people coming in. That CapEx is now being turned into working capital. So it's going from one budget to another to keep the business afloat. We can't keep doing that, otherwise it's a race to the bottom. And I think the other pressures that we have, obviously, is the skills, the training that we have. And I know Scotland's a wee bit different, where we had a fund there that we could draw down on for, medium to large size businesses could draw down on to train staff, and then previous years they've been doing that, and then Scottish Government, without getting the politics of it all, took that fund away. So then they had to look at taking the budget from one budget and within the business to put into that, continue that training, because you can't just say to somebody, sorry, I'm not going to train you anymore, because if you don't train them, somebody else will. So you're maybe losing a key member of staff. And then the other pressure we have, again, talking about Scotland, which is going to be more of a chat come the budget here in Westminster, is the non-domestic rates issue that we have in Scotland. It is absolutely catastrophic that the way that the hospitality sector is rated in Scotland. It's just beyond belief. And I hear colleagues in England shouting how hard it is in hospitality down here. Try living in Scotland, where we had no business rates relief for 3 years, when everybody down here was getting 75%, although the Barnett money was coming from Scotland, from England to Scotland, and not being used, because there's nothing in the Scotland Act, to my knowledge, that says it has to be used for that particular, like for like. So that was a big issue, and now thankfully, we would agree that business rates is getting looked at now in England come this budget. However, whatever happens here, we would look to see that mirrored in some way, if it's good for hospitality, in Scotland. And thankfully, in 2026, due to the work we've done, we're going to see that review, independent review, but that will not take effect until 2029. So the support has got to be there, before that.
Okay, Alison Griffiths.
Thank you, Chair. And my apologies, I have to be out of here in 5 minutes, so you'll be able to give me very, hopefully, short, snappy answers. First of all, Lydia, I worked in hospitality in Leamington as a student, so it's great to have you here. What struck me listening to you, and in fact to all of you, is that this isn't a cost of living crisis. This is a 2024 budget crisis. And it isn't only affecting the hospitality industry, it's affecting every single business, which is in turn affecting the footfall that all of you have across your doors. So not only are you lacking the confidence to hire a student like me back in the day, but actually every other business is worried about whether to take on staff. Is my characterisation of this something that you recognise?
No, I would say there's an important point. It wasn't a whole economy impact, the budget. Half of the jobs lost since the budget have been purely in hospitality. Hospitality is not half of the economy. This is a very asymmetric impact, which is really important. So if you take NICs as an example, it was a regressive tax. So the less you earn, the more you're hit. So if you earn £25,000 a year, you lost half of your pay rise to NICs alone. If you earn £150,000 a year, I spent most of my career in banking. If you earn £150,000 a year, as lots of mid to late 20s people do, you only lost about 20% of your pay rise to NICs. It's really important to understand that the impact of the budget was specific to hospitality and to a certain extent retail. It was not universal across the economy, and that distinction matters.
Is it affecting the number of people coming through your doors? Because you rely on people coming through your doors.
Yeah.
Do you mean affecting as in customers, or are you talking about new hires? What are you referring to?
But your customers. So if people have less money themselves,
of course,
they're not going to be spending the money in your stores. So the whole thing becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If people are concerned, vacancies are down, unemployment is up, people are concerned about their jobs, they're less likely to spend in a discretionary way.
Absolutely, and I think the touch points of hospitality on the high street are broader. My partner, for example, she has a hair salon, has been doing it for 30 years, and even she is saying that in the last few years her numbers are dropping away because people, when you're going out, we talked about this before, when you're going out on a Saturday, ladies normally start planning on a Wednesday, nails, hair, all these kinds of things. So every touch point in hospitality, as being the top point, are getting affected by this. The disposable income, they're not going out to get their hair done, they're not going out to get whatever, unless it's a special occasion. So spend is down, footfall is down, people still want to socialise, but the bottom line factor is the cost of doing that is being outweighed by people who want to sit at home, Deliveroo, get friends around the house, then it gets out of control because you have a health crisis, because it's the home poor, all these kinds of things. We want people back into hospitality. So what we need to do is governments need to act before it's too late, pin back the ears and listen to what's happening on the ground.
Yeah.
Don't just sit and act like we're all happy, and we're not. Everybody in this room is touched by hospitality, and we need to understand that.
Thank you, Chair. A minor positive note before we go back into the gloom. My constituency had the best pub in the country in 2023 and in 2024, and they're going for it for a third time, so I am rooting for them.
Who's the pub?
Tamworth Tap. Absolutely, they've done brilliantly well, and they've used heritage as their USP, and they're right in the town centre, and they're right on a high street. They, however, are not immune and have talked to me about many of the issues that we've just talked about. But my biggest bugbear, the committee and the chair have indulged me in, is energy and business energy and the absolute state of that sector, and how many businesses have been put under by very bad practices, by going in with debt, by all kinds of things, and various third-party intermediaries not being regulated at all. So I think there needs to be a focus, because there is money that can be saved if we change the attitude within that, if we get the regulation right, and if we actually look to best practice, which there are a number of people who are trying to push for. And so my question really is around, what things do you think could support in realms of this difficulty around the price of energy? And one example I'll give just before I'll let you come in is I met with a company called TEM, who are in the climate tech area. So this is very much around looking again at how we supply energy and the cost of it, and trying to bring that cost down and get directly to customers. And the Startup Coalition are also looking at this problem of how, when you have to have energy to produce beer, when you have to have energy to turn the lights on, to open your hospitality venue and more, we need to deal with that. And it's not all about the global crisis. Some of this is about what we can do tomorrow by just getting it right. Have you got some thoughts around what you would do? And perhaps I'll start with you, Morgan, as I kicked off with my brilliant Tamworth Tap pub.
Yeah, so there's definitely a few things around energy. So one of the things that we've been calling for years is following Ofgem's review into non-domestic energy, making sure that Ofgem is really empowered to actually make those recommendations, especially if we're talking about tackling poor service provider behavior. I think maybe the third-party intermediaries review will go some way into helping that. One of our concerns, again, is just lack of access. Pubs are considered a high-risk venue for electricity to get contracts with suppliers, so not all suppliers will offer a contract to a pub. So if you're in an area where you're whittled down to just one provider who's even willing to have a meeting with you, you have to take what they're going to give you, which is difficult. And especially if you've got SMEs, you don't have any of that bargaining power. So if we're talking about the small business strategy in particular, that's something that could be looked at. Other things with energy, and one thing that we are slightly concerned about is the industrial strategy is focusing a lot on access to energy for industries which are not hospitality. So it's a finite resource. Our big concern is because we weren't included in the industrial strategy, we are going to the back of the queue for grid access, we're going to the back of the queue for all of these improvements that the government is proposing to make, because we're not one of the 8 selective sectors. So that's something that ought to be kept in mind, I think, that when you're dealing with a finite resource, which you will inevitably have to exclude some people from, or some industries from, seem to be at the bottom of the queue now, which is another concern. And then my final point on energy is more on energy efficiency. So pubs are often in older buildings, listed buildings, historic buildings, and it is difficult to make those buildings energy efficient. It's expensive. It's sometimes impossible if it's listed status. So one of the things that we're calling for as well is some sort of green super deduction. If you're making improvements on your property, which improves energy efficiency or improves your energy provision and makes it greener, then there should be investment incentives for that in particular. And that would help unlock a lot of this investment that is sitting waiting, hoping that it can be used with the right incentives. So those are kind of the main points I would have on energy as a whole.
Good points.
Thank you. Lydia, did you want to comment at all?
I didn't think I have anything to add.
No,
right.
Fine. Anybody else?
There's one small, there's one additional thing, because I agree with all of that. we are increasingly seeing, I can't think of a better word than ambulance chasing firms going after small businesses for alleged prior liabilities. Quite often the businesses that they pursue are run maybe by an older couple who have all of the normal indicators that we would recognise for vulnerability to fraud. And I think, you know, that sector is in need of a stick.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Sonia Kumar.
I'll start with Alan. There's 79,000 vacancies in the food and accommodation industry in the UK. Can you tell me the impact of the sort of high vacancy rates in hospitality? And secondly, can I get you to give me 2 solutions short term and 2 solutions long term? I'll start with Alan first.
Okay, so you are in this sort of strange situation where you can have vacancies and letting people go at the same time, because you've got a problem with the affordability of the staff, and there are absolutely areas where we have high levels of vacancies and high levels of unemployment. Part of that is skills. It absolutely affects things like your point about businesses not being able to open some of the week, for example. It's been made worse by the impact of NICs on part-time work, because you'll all understand, of course, the asymmetric impact on people who work maybe 14, 16 hours a week. So the ability to plug gaps across the week has been reduced. 2 solutions. One is I would absolutely encourage the government to look at a specific easement for the cost of NICs for hiring people out of unemployment. That would help to address it. So, you know, if you said to HMRC, you don't get NICs on the first year of salary, but on the plus side, that person's off your benefits bill. That's probably a net benefit. The second one is early stage training. We've just launched a hospitality skills passport, which is a sort of universal entry standard for jobs in the sector. In the first instance, that's been funded by DWP with further education colleges across the country, a really positive thing. Phase 2 is the industry rolling it out itself. But anything which makes it, which de-risks hiring, I think would really help. Because, just very briefly, clearly if you're taking somebody from, you know, at the start of their career off under unemployment, there is a higher risk that having trained them, they then don't come back. So anything which de-risks that training process helps with willingness to hire, but it also helps with retention.
And long-term solutions?
Long-term solutions is about addressing affordability of employment. You know, I am absolutely clear that this newly regressive approach to taxes on wages is unacceptable on economic and moral terms. We need to make it possible for businesses like Lydia's to hire people rather than lose them. We will have lost 100,000 jobs by the next budget. It may well be 200,000 the year after, and then it'll start to plateau. So if you consider the lack of, you know, the jobs which are currently non-filled and the people that we're losing as 2 parts of the same problem, it is addressing the costs of hiring people in that part of the job market.
Okay, thank you. Going to move us on. Joshua Reynolds.
Thank you, Chair. Let's start with Alan. Do you think policymakers understand the value that the hospitality industry has?
My team have told me to say yes, of course. I'm not sure that that's true. Take the small business strategy. Basic economics. The performance of a business is mostly defined by its sector. The second correlation is its geography. The third is the size of the business. Gibrat's law applies. Absolutely. The fact that we saw an industrial strategy that included 8 industrial sectors, which between them you can argue about how you define them, but let's say somewhere between a quarter and a third of the economy, maximally you might get to 40% of the economy, you still have 60% of the economy unserved. The solution to that has apparently been an SME strategy, which will absolutely not do the job we need it to do. So in an observed sense, no, I don't think they do. And I will spare you the lecture on why they should.
Even do you think policymakers understand?
No. And I'll tell you why.
Reasoning?
I enjoy meetings, but I am sick to death of going to meetings day after day, and politicians, and please, I'm not including everybody in this room, but politicians nodding the head and going away and ticking the box and saying we have met, and nothing gets done. Nothing gets done about it. Now, why do we still stay in the business? And again, Alan and I were talking this earlier on. Why do we on this panel who are operating businesses, stay operating our businesses when we're making 1-2% or in many cases a loss? Because we're passionate about it. We love this. We love entertaining. Hospitality is there to be hospitalised and to entertain people and give people a good feeling. When that becomes laborious and everything, it's just a waste of time. And the other thing I want to bring into here is the mental health that is created by with employers, and nobody cares. Nobody cares. We are getting sandwiched. Governments are telling us what to do. Employees, in many times, are telling us what they're entitled to, which we're not arguing with, because we're told by governments that we have to do this. However, we're in the middle. Nobody is helping us, and that's what needs to change. And I think we need to talk about hospitality more as a profession, not as just a stopgap for young people coming into the job market. We need to keep them there. It's professional, and it can take you all around the world. It's a passport to the world, and we need everybody to talk about how professional it is.
Lydia, you're nodding along. Why do you think in the UK hospitality isn't seen as a profession, whereas in other countries you go to it's a career, whereas in the UK it's almost frowned upon in some quarters?
I actually had a lot to say on that, but I think that this is probably a lot to do with the fact that it's labelled as unskilled. A lot to do with the pay, the reward that people are given. Like, one of the things we talk about skills shortage, actually it's more, for me, it's about skills retention. I retain a lot of staff across, like, in terms of industry average. But if I do lose them, it's because I've maxed out on what I can pay them, and it's not meaningful to them anymore. They've been with me 6, 7, 8 years, really highly skilled chefs, and I can't pay them anymore, so I lose them to other industries. That's what it is. And with minimum wage going up so much, they're now on barely any more than minimum wage, which to a chef in their 30s who's been working in this industry since they were 13 is a little bit insulting. The thing I was going to say about not being valued, I think the answer is kind of in the question and the fact that we're having this conversation. I think if policymakers understood the unfair tax burden, the way that it worked, if they did understand that, I don't think we would have the VAT model that we do. I think it's as simple as that.
Morgan, do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, just a few points. I think there are two things that have been pointed to in recent years within the last budget, mostly, that were showing that the government was listening to hospitality, and that was the draft cut for beer duty, which was pitched as penny off a pint, and then also the commitment to reform business rates. That's very easy to say that that's paying attention to hospitality and valuing it, especially pubs. We are very privileged to be at the mouth of every MP, championing their local pub, and that is amazing. But when the government says we've given you 1p off a pint, penny off a pint, they haven't accounted for the 21p that they've added in other costs, which means that the price of a pint is going up. So that is that disconnect between the overarching picture of the sector versus a few sector-specific asks. The same thing is around business rates, which I would hope we do get to speak about a bit more. But the reformed business rates, while incredibly welcome, the BBPA has been very vocal about our support for the lower multipliers. Even if the government goes the full 20p reduction, the full reduction that legislation allows, best case scenario, we're standing still from where we are right now. Worst case scenario, not even worst case scenario, probably business rates are still going to go up because the revaluation is going to see higher business rates for businesses. So I want to disconnect the rhetoric from the actual results on the ground, and we're always very welcome to have these conversations, but you have to look at the 1 month, 2 month, 3 month, 4 month years impact after those decisions have been made.
Briefly, Mr. Weston.
Very briefly, talking to pubs in my constituency, Warwick and Leamington, they would really welcome a minimum pricing for alcohol. Stephen, in Scotland, how does it work for you?
In Scotland, we have a big issue with alcohol, and 80 to 85% of all alcohol sold in Scotland is sold in off sales, not in pubs, restaurants and hotels. So minimum unit pricing for the on-trade means nothing really. It was brought from 50 pence to 65 pence. Now, a lot of people in Scotland and the general public think that the minimum unit pricing is a tax that goes to government. It's not. It stays with the retailer. So for the on-trade, it'll not affect us until it gets to about £1.40, £1.50 a unit. So is it having an impact on sales of alcohol and off sales? I don't think it is, because if people want alcohol, they'll get it. Wales are brought in as well, I think. So really, what benefit is it? It's making the profits to the big retailers like the supermarkets. And I think there was an argument at the start about it, and now the retailers, I would think, and the big supermarket chains would welcome whether it went up even further, because they keep the profits.
Morgan, would you welcome something along those lines?
Yes, so I presume the pubs are asking for that because they anticipate it would drive footfall back into pubs. People wanted a beer, they would come to a pub. The reason why beer is so much more expensive in a pub is not because of the price of the alcohol, it's the fact that you have to employ people to serve it, the fact that you have to turn the lights on, all these things that we've been talking about. Even in the best case scenario, there will never be a world where it's going to be equivalent between a supermarket and a pub because of all those extraneous costs that a hospitality venue incurs. So if you want to talk about tackling the cost of people going out, it's the cost of doing business. It's all of those things we've been speaking about, of which, of course, the cost of the raw goods is one, but it's by no means the most substantial by any stretch of the imagination.
Thank you. John Cooper.
Thank you, Chairman. The government has the small business plan, which was mentioned briefly there, and if you look at the hospitality offer, if you like, within that, it's got some quite interesting things about hospitality zones and fast-tracking licences and things like that. It does, listening to what you're saying here today, strike me as though the government is amputating your legs but offering you new shoes in the morning. And you, Stephen, said that we need to act before it's too late, and I might just come to you afterwards because this business plan doesn't apply in Scotland. So looking at that plan, what do you think of it, and what changes would you make to try and make it more efficient and more helpful? Maybe start with you, Morgan.
I think there were a few interesting points about licensing, particularly like you say. I think one of the issues with pubs in the hospitality sector in general is, I was actually listening to the session just before this, it's creating that space where people are coming to the city centre to have a holistic experience. Maybe they're shopping, they're coming to a pub for a drink, they're having a meal. So it's hospitality is special, but you're not going to go to a pub that's in like a supermarket car park. You know, you need to have that space that is more holistic. So I think that's one thing that should be tackled if you're looking at the hospitality development zones in particular. Licensing is important. I think a lot of local licensing can be a bit restrictive. I think there's also a misconception when people say, oh, pubs are closing at 9 p.m. That's because of their license. They're closing at 9 p.m. because they can't afford to employ people to stay there. They can't afford to keep the lights. So I keep going back to that overall cost of doing business. Regulation is a huge issue, undoubtedly, but one of those things is margins are so fine, you have to take those decisions where you can. One final point on licensing is I think that there's unfortunately a predisposition to paint hospitality, especially pubs, as the bad guy in the scenario. If you get noise complaints, even if the pub is pre-existing, it's been there for many years, if you get noise complaints, that can have a really detrimental impact on that pub's ability to trade, especially if their license is restricted in terms of their pub garden, how many tables they can have outside, how many people they can serve outside in particular. So when every person drinking a pint counts, any sort of restrictions on who you can serve and where can really have an impact.
Alan, do I come to you just on that plan?
So the licensing elements of the strategy, the bits I liked, I would say that my colleague Kate, our chair, was involved in the sprint for that. I think particularly having a national licensing policy framework will be good because it will help to, look, we're all NIMBYs, right? NIMBY is an irregular verb. You're a NIMBY, I'm simply concerned for my local community. So a national policy framework will be a good thing. Equally, the agents of change proposals will help with that problem of people sort of buying a flat next to a pub and then being annoyed to find that there's a beer garden. But it's more what isn't in it. And I said that, look, you know, it's not about whether or not you're a small business. Sectoral, you just look at the credit behaviours of a set of businesses. Sector drives businesses' success and failure rates far more than the size of a business, right? You know, a small hotel or a small restaurant or a small bar has more in common with a large hotel, restaurant or bar than it does with a small accountancy firm. So it's the wrong prism for policy and the wrong mechanism. And this committee will have been told this for 30 years and with various members, that pulling the SME lever to help specific sectors isn't going to work. Particularly the fact that we have sectoral lenses on the 8 industrial strategy sectors, which tells me that the government know I'm right, otherwise we'd just have a large business strategy, means that we are excluded. There are practical effects. So, for example, you know, on skills and bringing people into the workforce, the 8 industrial strategy sectors are going to have the flexibility they need on the apprenticeship levy to train people in more modular ways. We won't. There's nothing on energy, which is useful for us. And fundamentally, it drives the sort of asymmetric fiscal decisions we saw in the budget last year. So, look, very positive on the licensing framework, but let's be clear, this is mistaken and misshapen policy.
We had a slight interruption. Can you just say the last sentence again, please?
Sorry, mistaken and misshapen policy. I'm not sure that adds much, but it's a nice term.
I'll make sure we got it down.
Lydia, sorry, would you agree with that when you're on the ground? Do you think this policy's much help to you at all?
No, not particularly. I think that I'll mirror what Morgan said. We need to deal with the bigger problem, which is the cost of being open and ultimately the way that we're taxed. I think if you genuinely wanted to help this industry, that is the answer. And I think that anything else is kind of, if I'm honest, what's lip service.
Yeah. And then Stephen, just finally, Chair, if you don't mind, just on the Scottish position, the government here has got a plan, and all right, it might be flawed. I'm not convinced that the Scottish Government has got any kind of plan other than to tax you into the ground. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, probably. We already know it. We're taxed heavier anyway.
It's quite remarkable that the Scottish Government got money through the Barnett formula to pass on rates relief, and that money just disappeared into Edinburgh, and you never saw that. That seems quite remarkable, isn't it?
Not a penny, and we had to struggle on. And I often wonder how much governments across the whole of the United Kingdom want to take out of the slice of the cake. Because the bigger the slice that the government take, and I'll give you an example, 34 pence for every single pound that comes across the till in Scotland goes in a tax of some kind, right? Whether it be the UK Treasury to Scotland, whatever, 34 pence every pound. So I think that's an important figure when you think of what we're left with, 66 pence to do everything else. When you talk about licensing, you know, we have really strict licensing laws in Scotland, different to England. We don't have a happy hour, as they want to call it. Everything's got to be 72 hours in Scotland. So people are going where we are, down in the borders. I'm 15 minutes on the train to Carlisle. They can go and buy whatever they want down there, 3 for 1, 2 for 1, whatever it is. We don't have that in Scotland. Okay, that relates to you know, the bigger issue of alcohol in Scotland.
Back to my colleague's point about minimum unit pricing. So we are close to that border. There's no minimum unit pricing south of the border. There is north of the border. Are we getting to the point where it would pay you to do a bootleg run across the border, load up and come back over?
Listen, you see it every day of the week, white vans up and down the road, kind of Daz to Carlisle or wherever the case is, filling up for their clubs or whatever the case is. You know, we've seen it with DRS, the issues that we're going to have with the deposit return scheme in Scotland. You know, and get on to all that with what's happening in Wales now as well. So yeah, we just need a good hospitality sector that's for everybody. And it's not about handouts. Nobody wants handouts. I'm fed up going to governments and asking for a handout at a budget. We just want fairness. I think that's the key word here, is fairness.
I think that's a very good note on which to draw this panel to a conclusion. Thank you very much for bearing with us as we ran over time. We very much wanted to make sure that we had the space to let you say what you wanted to say. As you can see from this committee's attempt to lever in the name of our favourite hospitality outlets in each of our constituencies, we share the passion that you have for this industry, and you've really helped us make sure that we've got the evidence down to draw the right conclusions. So thank you very much indeed for the time that you've spared for this committee today. That concludes this panel. That concludes this session. Order, order.